yeah, screw it, I'm going for it. I have officially just launched, literally just seconds ago. I got $10, nice. I just officially launched my GoFundMe so I could do on-the-ground reporting in Hong Kong. There are actually 2 major protests coming up very soon, and that's why I am trying to raise the minimum $2,700 that it is going to take to get me on a flight and a hostel with just some of the basic necessities and some security essentials needed for this trip. And if you want to be a part of that, the link to this GoFundMe, of course, will be in the link below. And anyone who donates, I will actually be doing a live AMA with, specifically regarding how to cover a riot or a revolution, whatever you want to call Hong Kong. It is a major event that the world is paying attention to, and that's why it's important to have an eye on it that is not controlled by special interests. Now, regarding the specific protests happening in Hong Kong, this is not Hong Kong. Wait, hold on, they got umbrellas, but this is definitely not Hong Kong. I mean, I think I know. I think I remember where this is. Wait, hold on. Oh, yeah! These are the yellow vest protests that I've been covering since day one that have been going on for now over 41 weeks! With, of course, a vicious crackdown from the state with barely any mention from, of course, the U.S. Western mainstream media. As if, though, it just didn't exist. And gee, I wonder why that would happen, because, oh yeah, these protests don't work to the greater U.S. geopolitical assets and goals that they are trying to push, which again should show you how media could be very easily manipulated. Now, this is especially interesting since, of course, the G7 is happening in France right now, and yet still, the Western reporters seem to totally have a blind spot against this major, important protest movement that, by and large, they either ignored, slandered, or never gave full, respectable coverage to. But I do believe as independent media, it is also important to talk about these protests in context and to, of course, not to forget them. But, of course, returning to Hong Kong, where more violent clashes and protests happening today in the streets, we have to understand that just because protest movement does work in the favor of a greater U.S. geopolitical goal does not make it automatically compromised or bad in some light. Again, this is why one of the reasons why I really want to go there and investigate firsthand, because with the severity of this protest, it is important to fully understand what is really happening, and you could only do that by being on the ground and not just watching the curated clips on social media, which, by the way, have also censored some information regarding the Hong Kong protests. But today, we saw massive clashes, massive amount of people coming out, as of course the police officers in Hong Kong were using tear gas, with even reports of a Molotov cocktail being thrown by protesters against the police. There's also very brutal footage coming out, which of course we're going to stop here before it gets too brutal, of very unnecessary police abuse and assault of individuals who clearly look defenseless. But one of the major clips that is making its rounds today is, of course, how the Hong Kong protesters surrounded the police department headquarters and decided to chop down and take down surveillance facial recognition cameras surrounding the building. An inspirational sign for many, since we are also hearing that many people in Hong Kong are also fearing the Chinese surveillance state and the Chinese social credit score. Now, of course, the speculations and accusations by China that the United States is somehow cooperating and involved in these protests is escalating, as we're seeing tensions in general escalate between China and the United States, as we reported yesterday, with, of course, the trade war between the two countries going hyper-nuclear, economically speaking, of course. But today we got more saber rattling in the market space, with China promising more consequences after their very aggressive move yesterday, with what they're calling as Trump's response as the, quote, wrong action, when, of course, Trump added an additional $550 billion worth of goods that will have additional tariffs on because of that, taxes on because of that, and with such aggressive talks going back and forth between China and the United States, the world's most prominent economic markets, battling out between each other. This has sparked many fears and has dominated the talks at the ongoing G7. But even with a lot of the speculation going on, many people do believe that there will be some kind of compromise, which is still unknown to many when exactly that will happen. But overall, from my assessment, which I have been covering for a number of years now, specifically with US and Chinese relations, this is an inevitable conflict, an inevitable headbutt that will happen between these world powers that will have a severe negative ramification on everyone. And that is according to my analysis and, of course, my own opinion. Another thing that dominated the topics and talks at the G7 was, of course, Donald Trump and the new UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, with, of course, many liberal establishment news rags like The Independent and other leftist figures demanding that the new UK Prime Minister be cuddling up to the European leaders instead of Donald Trump, who may or may not encourage the Brexit deal to be pushed through. Again, a lot of speculation on the world stage as people are just reading body language, but the world theater is definitely very interesting with Donald Trump on the forefront of it, which will be very interesting to see how they play out, and of course something that we will be following very closely. With all of this on the backdrop of Brexit, you definitely expect some contention. Now, as these insignificant puppies controlled by the corporate oligarch state of elitist establishment inbred royalty pedophiles really run the show, as clearly demonstrated through the Jeffrey Epstein saga, we of course have the latest developments surrounding the massive cover-up of this so-called alleged suicide, which only the people of the lowest of IQs, including Attorney General Barr, believe actually happened. And that numbskull is investigating all of this. But again, anyway, I'm getting too far ahead of myself, and I'm being just a little bit hyperbolic. So apologies, I'm not being as accurate. I'm being hyperbolic, just so you know that. But we got some latest developments surrounding this pedo, specifically with even his best friend giving an interview recently, of course an art collector and quote scientist, Stuart Pevar, who went on and called the children that Epstein abused and attacks trollops, which is pretty much the definition of a woman who had many casual physical encounters or relationships. Again, this is what his best friend called the children victims of Jeffrey Epstein, saying that they were somehow complicit and that poor pedo Epstein had, quote, a mental disorder that made him crave physical relations with others. A mental disorder called satyriasis, which really means an idiot who can't keep it in his pants and is a monster. I mean, look at this freak. For freak's sake, what is wrong with this man? And of course, he's saying he never knew about any of this until he was informed by one of his alleged victims, which he, of course, quote, never realized. Come on now. You're his best friend, and no, don't give me that bullcrap. You're hanging around a convicted pedo and talk about having no sense of reality at all. My goodness, that is one weak, pathetic excuse. Almost a very similar one that we're seeing also just moments ago from Prince Andrew, a part of the inbred UK royalty and their groom of the stools. Well, this asshat just released a statement saying that it was a mistake and an error to hang out with a convicted pedophile. That, of course, being Jeffrey Epstein, which, of course, Prince Andrew is pictured with and even videotaped with small children around him. And again, we're somehow supposed to believe that all the powerful people that he hung out with had no clue and no idea to the horrible acts that were, again, publicly talked about. I mean, this is just ridiculous. And the story gets crazier as we're finding out that Epstein was trying to also intimidate people with dead cats. And again, we have to understand here, Epstein many times was able to successfully buy off the media, including his ability to buy off many accusers against him, settling out of court so public information would not be made about his horrible actions. But the few journalists who dared publicly talk about the truth about Jeffrey Epstein, well, Epstein would send them warnings when he didn't like journalists who covered his depraved acts, even being accused here and documented that he found one editor and sent this editor a bullet outside of his home, then a severed head of a dead cat. All of this when the magazine, Vanity Fair specifically, was publishing information about Jeffrey Epstein's act, which NPR says this was done to intimidate, no questions about it. It's also important to understand here that a New York Times reporter who covered Epstein in a positive light also was able to receive $30,000 in a donation for his child's school program. And then people wonder why victims don't come forward. All of this while powerful people protected him, and sadly now a massive cover-up has happened where we will never find out the true severity and the truth behind all of these, I would even detail, satanic actions by elites. It's also being reported, although I have not been able to independently verify this, that the New York Post reporter who first broke the story of Epstein's first suicide attempt was a journalist who allegedly also flew on the Lolita Express and previously was hired by Stanley Kubrick as a consultant on Eyes Wide Shut. This, of course, being Larry Solona, who I would have many questions for, to say the least. So again, that's pretty much the news for today and yet another episode. What the hell really happened? Thank you again for everyone who donates to the GoFundMe. Without you guys, I would not be able to do the job that I do, and only because of your support, your help, I'm able to be here. I'm able to be there on the ground, the madness firsthand. And because of that, thank you guys. Love you. Stay tuned for more here on WeAreChange.org.